recently I did a school performance of the SpongeBob musical, which was great fun and a really good show, and I'm not allowed to show any of it or my school will get into legal trouble. But the point is, because of this show, I didn't get home till around 10 PM every night. Likewise, I take it upon myself to watch at least one film every day because I'm horribly unemployed. But because of this, I need to find stuff. Really short stuff because of the show. And I'm a really big fan of ForteRaffie Productions, so I discovered some of his videos on animated mockbusters and realised how short they are, so I decided to watch a bunch of them. This was one of the worst decisions I ever made, and I feel the need to make a video about my pain as compensation for the fact that this legitimately pushed me over the edge. I'm going to talk about every film in order that I watched them, starting now. The first of this utterly painful series of films was actually the newest out of them all, Tappy Toes, which, if you couldn't tell, is a rip-off of George Miller's anti-masterpiece, Happy Feet. I mean, all of these movies just seem obviously inherently bad, and, well, they are, but the original Happy Feet isn't even good. It and its sequel are incredibly shitty movies, so when you make a bad rip-off of the bad movie, you're going to end up with a pretty goddamn horrific final product, and boy, can you tell. There's bad animation, and then there's Tappy Toes, a 41-minute direct-to-video method of torture that feels less like a film and more like an experiment in how much utter shite you can endure before going manic. This movie aims for heartwarming charm and lands somewhere between very whatever at its best and some of the worst humanity has to offer at its worst. From its opening moments, the film establishes its production values, and by establishes, I mean it warns you. Warns you to turn away. Click off, not continue. The animation is so stiff it gives goddamn Invincible Season 3 a run for its money. The character rigs look like they were assembled from spare parts found on an abandoned hard drive and entirely animated in Adobe Character Animator. Movements lack weight, timing, or any sense of physical logic. Characters glide rather than walk. They pivot instead of turn. When they dance, they don't. They just kind of shift around. The story itself is aggressively minimal. We follow a young penguin who loves to tap dance despite living in a world that neither doesn't understand or doesn't care. Conflict is introduced loosely, resolved quickly, and usually feels like it was improvised 5 minutes before rendering began. Scenes don't so much build as simply occur. Dialogue is delivered in flat, disconnected exchanges that never even remotely resemble human conversation. It feels like each line was recorded in isolation, with the actors unaware of the tone, pacing, or emotional context. And yet, the most fascinating thing about Tappy Toes is not that it's bad. All of these films are bad. What makes this one memorable is how strangely empty it feels. There's no texture in the world. Even the Arctic setting is less a landscape and more a white void with occasional blue dots. Backgrounds appear and disappear with the confidence of placeholder assets that were never meant to survive to the third draft. There's a surreal quality to it, like watching a rehearsal for a movie that never actually got finished. The musical numbers, which should be the theoretical selling point, are equally puzzling. Like I said, the choreography is barely animated, beyond repetitive foot movement cycles. Editing does not enhance rhythm, it often works against it. Songs begin and abruptly end with less punctuation than most high school group chats. There's no sense of escalation, no mounting energy. Tap dancing, an art form built on precision, syncopation, I think that's how you say it, becomes completely goddamn formless here. The film seems to understand that tap dancing is about feet moving quickly, but not about timing, impact, or musical storytelling, something that I know as someone who would never go near the concept of tap dancing. Voice performances range from monotone to inexplicably enthusiastic. Sometimes in the same scene, emotional beats land with a soft thud. When characters are excited, they sound mildly interested. When they're upset, they sound mildly annoyed. There's an uncanny valley in the performances, especially from the mother who is always talking about how their son, who they don't know is alive, and how he's actually alive, but she doesn't seem to care. Like, Honey, I think our dead child might actually be alive. The pacing is another of the many enigmas of this film. At 41 minutes, Tappy Toes is the length of a television special, and shorter at points. Yet it manages to feel both rushed and drawn out. How do they do it? Plot points are introduced without setup and resolved without payoff. Moments that should provide tension disappear instantly. The film doesn't build towards a climax so much as vaguely sleepwalk towards a stop. Not even an ending, just the film stopping like you turned it off halfway through. And yet, this is important. There is something almost admirable about this film's existence. Tappy Toes does not feel cynical the way some mockbuster productions do, and by most I mean all. It feels earnest, albeit misguided. There is an attempt at positivity, there is an attempt and a moral about self-expression. The film believes dancing is good. It believes being yourself is important. It just lacks the technical ability or narrative skill to communicate those ideas effectively. Watching it becomes a strangely fascinating experience. You stop asking whether it's good and start asking how it was made. How many animators were involved? Probably only a few, right? How long did production take? Surely only a few months, even a few weeks, right? Were deadlines impossibly tight? They must have been, right? Was it assembled primarily from stock assets? It looks like it. There's some sort of sick, misogynistic interest in what a shit film production it must have had, because sweet God. It also becomes unintentionally funny. Not because of the jokes, maybe one of those lands across the entire runtime, but because of the timing gaps, awkward pauses and animation glitches that create accidental comedy. Characters will hold expression for a beat too long, scenes will cut at slightly the wrong moment, dance sequences will loop but just long enough to feel surreal. It edges into so bad and good territory, unlike the rest of these. Compared to mainstream animated films of its era, the difference is stark. When major studios emphasize expression character animation, layered sound design and tightly structured storytelling, and money, Tappy Toes feels like a rough draft that somehow skipped the revision stage. It feels like the Happy Feet's proof of concept that somehow got released as a 40-minute film. Is it entertaining? In the traditional sense, absolutely fucking not. Children are accustomed to things that are made by Pixar and Disney that even when bad are entertaining, and at least have good animation. Adults will sit there considering if keeping their kid happy is worth the utter agony they're in. Ultimately, Tappy Toes is not memorable because of its story, music, or characters. It is memorable because it is so goddamn atrocious in a way that keeps you intrigued and not just bored. At 41 minutes, it doesn't overstay its welcome, but it also does, and it certainly tests your endurance. Tappy Toes stands as a reminder that not all animated musicals are created equal. Some soar, some shuffle, and some just gently vibrate in place. Overall, Tappy Toes is by far the best out of all the films that we will be talking about today. 1 out of 10. Ratatouille is a feature-length animated embarrassment that feels less like a movie and more like a tax write-off, accidentally exported as a DVD. Also at 40 minutes, it somehow feels about 5 times longer. Like my Letterboxd review says, I felt like I was watching this for 10 lifetimes, so I checked how long it actually was and found out it was only 40 minutes. Stretching a threadbare premise into a hypothetically repetitive experiment that tests the limits of viewer patience. The film follows Marcel Toing, a rat who dreams of becoming a chef in a city where rats and humans apparently coexist without any logical framework or consequence, because doing that would require some sort of effort. Because God forbid these people put in any bloody effort. The premise alone isn't the problem. The problem is that Ratatouille doesn't understand storytelling, character motivations, pacing, animation fundamentals, basic audio mixing, or what joy is. Let's start with the animation, because it is the first and most aggressively noticeable flaw, and by noticeable I mean it feels like it's beating you over the head with how terrible the animation is throughout the entire runtime. Characters move like stiff plastic mannequins dragged across the screen with a mouse cursor and CapCut keyframes. There is no weight, no squash, and no stretch. No sense of physical presence. Walk cycles just loop endlessly. Gestures repeat like a mannequin, characters glide rather than step, rotate in place rather than turn, and hold blank expressions that suggest their facial rigs just gave up because they realized what a terrible movie they were in. Lighting is flat and artificial. Constant washing environments and a dull digital 10th layer of hell. Textures look like they were bought for a quid. Backgrounds feel empty as hell, like abandoned video game maps waiting for anyone to play again. There's no atmosphere, no lived-in detail. You spend the entire thing waiting for the Western thing to roll through. It looks less like a finished animation film and more like a rough demo reel accidentally rendered and dragged out. Then there's the sound design, which doesn't actually exist. Dialogue constantly sounds like it was recorded in some random guy's bathroom using a microphone purchased for £5 10 minutes before the recording. Lines echo really weirdly or feel disconnected from the environment. Music cues appear abruptly, loop awkwardly, and fade out without any dramatic purpose. Silence lingers where tension should be building. It's amateurish in a way that's genuinely distracting. It deserves a fucking Razzie. The script is equally empty. Scenes don't build toward each other. Conflict arises, then evaporates with no middle, just a jump. Characters announce their goals rather than the film showing us what they want, not helped by the fact that you barely feel like any of their goals are real. Conversations feel so disconnected, like exchanges stitched together without rhythm. Emotional beats are introduced without setup and resolved without consequence or meaning. There is no narrative propulsion, only a sequence of loosely connected events. And don't get me wrong, loosely connected series of events can work as films, i.e. Pulp Fiction is amazing, but here it just feels horrific. Marceau toying himself is not a character so much as a concept, and not even a particularly good one. He wants to cook. That's it. There's no internal struggle, no nuance, no growth. Supporting characters are even thinner. Total one-dimensional archetypes without personality traits. The antagonists, if they can even be called that, don't have menace, depth, coherence, motivation, quality voice act, memorability, or anything remotely good about them. Their motivation just seems to shift based on whatever the scene requires at that specific moment. Comedy is a necessary and obvious part of animated family films, but with this film, jokes land with total silence. The timing is distinctly off. Physical gags don't have any exaggeration or clarity. The verbal humour is limited to repetitive shouting, not helped by the obviously incredibly disinterested voice actors. The film makes volume for energy and repetition for comedic structure. Pacing is perhaps the film's most punishing flaw. At only 40 minutes, it somehow feels utterly endless. Scenes drag so far beyond their purpose. Characters wander aimlessly through environments while repeating the same animation cycles over and over again. There is no tightening, no editing, no precision, no sense of momentum. The film does not move around. It stalls repeatedly until reaching a stop. A bit like Tappy does, actually. What makes Ratatouille especially frustrating is not that it's derivative, but that it doesn't even execute its imitation competently, unlike Tappy to some degree. It doesn't feel like the people who made it had any enjoyment in its creation. It borrows the surface-level premise of a culinary rat and strips away every element that made the content engaging elsewhere. There's no sensory delight in food preparation, no kinetic animation to make cooking feel dynamic, no emotional core, just static scenes of characters explaining what they're doing and sometimes running. Visually, the character designs are bland and unsettling in equal measure. Their proportions feel horribly inconsistent. Their eyes stare blankly. Their mouths move in stiff, limited shapes that barely sync with their dialogue. There's a persistent lifelessness to their expressions that creates an uncanny detachment. Even technical basics just don't work. Characters occasionally clip through objects, movements lack interpolation, cuts feel abrupt and horribly unmotivated, transitions don't smooth the passage of time or space. It is the kind of film that makes you aware of every frame because so few of them feel complete or even actually animated. There's no thematic depth, no subtext, no meaningful exploration of ambition, artistry, or belonging. The film gestures vaguely towards the idea that following your dreams is good, but it does so without any conviction or development. it just says the morons that are dramatising it in any way. By the time the film leaps towards its conclusion, the exhaustion sets in. Not emotional catharsis, not satisfaction, just relief that it's nearly over. The ending resolves conflict with the same abruptness that defined the rest of the story, offering no payoff for the time invested. Ratatouille isn't charmingly bad. It isn't enjoyably ridiculous. It isn't even memorably disastrous in a spectacular way. It is simply incompetent. A hollow imitation rendered with minimal craft and even less care. It fails on a technical, narrative, and emotional level simultaneously. In the crowded landscape of animated films, even the low-budget efforts often have at least one redeeming quality. A feature an interesting character, a catchy song, a striking visual idea. Ratatouille doesn't have any of those things. It exists, occupies time, and then ends. And when it ends, you don't feel anger, you don't feel amusement, you just feel kind of dull disbelief and tiredness that something so unfinished was released as a completed product. Little Panda Fighter is not merely a bad animated film. It's a catastrophic misunderstanding of how movies function at every conceivable level. Watching it is less like viewing a finished product and more like witnessing corrupted software attempt to stimulate storytelling on its third attempt. The premise is almost insultingly thin. A panda named Pincutta, the worst name of all time, works at a boxing gym and dreams of being a dancer. That's it. That's the entire goddamn narrative engine. There is no meaningful escalation, no compelling antagonist, no emotional stakes. The scenes occur because the runtime has not yet been exhausted. Events don't build, they just follow one another in a flat, mechanical progression. The animation is aggressively lifeless and feels the need to remind you of how goddamn awful it is at all times. The characters don't inhabit movements or space, they just float over it and through it. Their limbs bend at horribly weird and unnatural angles. Movements loop over with visible, horrible, and disgusting repetition. The facial expressions barely change, creating a blank, mannequin-like stare that drains every intention of energy and has permanently ingrained into my nightmares. Not to mention timing. The single most important tool in animation is so bloody non-existent in this film. Actions happen too quickly to register or linger far too long, producing an uncanny rhythm that feels horribly broken. The lighting is harsh and artificial, as though someone discovered the default render button and refused to experiment further. The surfaces are overly smooth, environments empty and textureless, the world feels hollow like a 2003 video game that never received its final art pass. The characters cast shadows inconsistently, depth perception fluctuates, and nothing feels grounded. Then there's the choreography, a baffling failure given the film centered on dance. The dance sequence is the most inert ever committed to digital animation. The movements are stiff, repetitive, and devoid of masculinity. It feels like Pancake, or whatever the fuck his name is, and just throwing himself across the screen through these completely empty backgrounds. The character doesn't dance so much as jitter slightly while really, really bad music plays in the background. There's no sense of rhythm, no fluid transitions, no impact. It looks less like a dancing scene and more like someone testing a character for the first time in their first time in Adobe Animate. The voice acting ranges from flat to inexplicably horrid. The line delivery tends to sound like actors recorded the dialogue without context, emotion, or even awareness of what scene they were performing. It's like they'd never even read the script, like they were just given a bunch of disconnected lines they don't even know any context for. The conversations don't have chemistry. I'm not convinced the VAs even knew who each other were. The emotional moments collapse because no one sounds emotionally invested in the slightest. The audio mixing is inconsistent, with music overpowering dialogue or dropping abruptly between cuts. The script feels assembled from cliches without understanding why those cliches exist in the first place. Follow your dreams is repeated by the characters over and over and over again without being earned. Conflicts appear randomly, just like all of these goddamn movies. The characters change their minds without internal motivation. The antagonist's presence barely registers. I can't even remember his name. The stakes are declared but never felt because the film doesn't even try to justify them. Perhaps the most damning is the complete absence of cinematic craft. Scenes don't build tension, editing doesn't enhance pacing, shots lack any internal framing, there's no visual storytelling at all. The characters explain things directly because the film cannot communicate them visually. Emotional beats are telegraphed bluntly and then abandoned. Comparisons to Kung Fu Panda are inevitable, and the film is asking for it considering what a blatant knockoff it is. But the gap in quality is almost difficult to articulate. While Kung Fu Panda demonstrated expressive animation, good action and choreography, and layered character arcs, Little Panda Fighter presents a static, clumsy approximation of what ambition is. It copies the surface idea of animal protagonists with a dream, and discards everything that made the structure compelling in any film with that basic concept. Even as ironic viewing material, it struggles. The bad films sometimes achieve a kind of accidental entertainment through excess or incompetence so spectacular it becomes fascinating. The Little Panda Fighter doesn't soar to these chaotic heights. It's too boring. It's too dull, too repetitive, too empty. It lacks the ambition to fail spectacularly. Instead, it fails quietly and continuously. The most exhausting element is its pacing. Despite being only 50 minutes, which does make it the longest of any of these films, it feels just forgettable. The scenes stretch without rhyme or reason. The conversations repeat the same information again and again and again and again and again. The dance numbers reintroduce the same animation loops over and over. There's no escalation, no crescendo, no satisfying release. The film moves forward only because time passes, and it's so goddamn maddening. Technically, it feels horribly unfinished. The character rigs appear limited. Lip syncs is inconsistent. Again, the goddamn scene is one of the worst rendered things ever.
You mean? You thought I was really talking about... I thought I was going crazy. Sorry, kid. Ain't that a kick in the head? You see, kid, I guess I really didn't know what you were talking about.
The environment lacks design. Camera movements is either static or awkwardly mechanical and robotic. The kind of production that gives the impression of extreme time constraints combined with minimal oversight or care. There's no charm, no visual inventiveness, no thematic depth, no emotional authenticity. It doesn't function as a children's film because it lacks energy and humour. It doesn't function as a parody because it lacks any self-awareness. It doesn't function as a drama because it lacks any stakes. It barely functions as an animation. I don't think it should be considered a series of barely animated frames. By the time it reaches its conclusion abruptly and without catharsis, the overwhelming emotion is not outrage or amusement, it's total fatigue. The experience is numbing, it drains attention rather than capturing it. Little Panda Fighter represents the lowest rung of feature-length animation, a product designed to exist, not to resonate. The only reason you would ever watch this is in case you either need a really short film like me, or if you're watching it for laughing value. It mimics the silhouette of a successful film without understanding structure, performance, or basic craft. It's not misunderstood, it's not secretly clever, it's simply incoherent. If animation is the art to bring drawings to life, The Little Panda Fighter is the opposite, a demonstration of how thoroughly life can be drained from movement, colour, and sound. And somehow, it keeps going for nearly an hour. There's a specific kind of fatigue that sets in when you've watched one too many low-budget animated knockoffs. And What's Up Balloon to the Rescue is where that fatigue turns into resignation, at least for me. Not outrage, not disbelief, just a slow, dull acceptance that this is going to happen for the next hour and there is nothing you can do about it. The premise vaguely gestures towards adventure. A man, a balloon, a journey. That's about as far as the storytelling ambition goes. Unlike the film, it is so transparently shallow. This one doesn't build emotional stakes, doesn't establish meaningful character dynamics, and certainly doesn't earn any sentimentality. It just simply moves its characters from one loosely connected scenario to another, as if the script were generated by typing "balloon adventure movie" into a search bar and copying the first 5 suggestions. Even though the plot is pretty different, this film is clearly trying to bring the emotional resonance of Up, but it never can, it never will. The opening scene of Up, that tear-jerking masterpiece of a scene, just puts into perspective what utter abysmal shite this film is. The kind of utter shite no one should ever have to endure. The animation is exactly what you'd expect at this point. Stiff, plastic, weightless. I don't know how many more times I'm going to have to use those exact words over again. Characters don't move so much as reposition, facial expressions barely shift, and when they do, it feels more like someone toggled between 2 preset options labelled neutral and mild concern. There's no physicality, no gravity. The balloon itself, theoretically the visual centerpiece, floats with all the realism of a shitty Windows XP screensaver. The environments are empty in that uniquely depressing way these films seem to specialise in. Wide spaces with minimal detail, flat lighting, texture maps that look stretched or unfinished, like they were meant to be something you download for free and then add to and build off of, not something to be used by themselves. You start noticing the backgrounds repeating, a sin which not even any of the other films did. You start noticing how little exists beyond the immediate foreground. It feels less like a world, more like a digital suggestion of one. Dialogue trudges along without rhyme or rhythm. Characters speak in blunt exposition, no subtext, no subtlety, nothing. Emotional beats are announced rather than felt. A lot of them just have you blankly staring at the screen, even though the film actually wants you to feel some sort of emotion you never have and never will feel watching goddamn "What's Up, Balloon to the Rescue!" ! There's no chemistry, no subtext, no escalation, goddamn nothing. Conversations end not because they reach a natural conclusion, but because the next scene needs to begin. It's mechanical storytelling input line, output response. Move on. And the pacing is exhausting. The scenes linger too long without purpose, while others just fly by so fast it could give you a headache. Transitions feel abrupt yet somehow still slow. There's no momentum. An adventure film without propulsion is a uniquely draining experience. You keep waiting for lift, for something to energize the story, but it never arrives. The balloon may arrive, but the film never does, and neither does your crippling, sleep-inducing boredom. Comedy, if intended, barely registers because the jokes are so unfunny, and pass without timing. The reactions lack exaggeration or any sense of joy, or any sense of the people animating it want to be there. Physical gags have no snap at all. The soundtrack occasionally attempts to inject energy, but the music loops awkwardly and fades without impact, so it just turns into another utterly draining experience. It's like the film knows something exciting should be happening, but can't figure out how to make it, so it just gives up and pretends it is. What's most tiring is the familiarity. By this point, the mockbuster style, you can predict the structure. Inspirational platitude about dreams, check. Mild obstacles resolved almost immediately, check. Vague villainy without depth, check. There's no surprise left, only totally painful, utterly boring repetition. Even visually, there's a sameness to it all. The character designs feel interchangeable with other low-budget CGI efforts of the era. Smooth plastic surfaces, limited rigging, eyes that stare a little bit too blankly. It's so uncanny, almost comedically so. This feels like it would have been made on Gmod and Newgrounds in 2004. The kind of aesthetic that drains personality from every frame. And yet somehow it keeps going. Not escalating, not deepening, continuing. Grudgingly, for a very, very long time. You know those shows, usually sitcoms, that just go on and on without any rhyme or reason, where I get to the point where it's almost begging to end, but we're on 20 seasons and it's still popular and everyone knows it'll never ever end? This feels like the film equivalent of that, except instead of 10 seasons, it's 40 minutes. The runtime isn't extreme, but it feels longer because nothing builds. There's no emotional layering, no thematic ambition, just scene after scene of a little less than passable at best animation, strung together until the clock runs out. By the final act, if it can be called that since you're not invested in the outcome in the slightest, you're simply aware that the film must be nearing a contractual obligation to end. When resolution arrives, it does so without catharsis, no triumph swell, no payoff, just a quiet stop of boredom. Watching this film doesn't inspire anger the way some notoriously bad films do. It inspires weariness. It feels like a product assembled to occupy shelf space, designed to catch an iterative glance and ride the confusion of a similar title. There's no spark, no urgency, no craft pushing against limitation. It makes you tired of these kind of films. Even if you've never seen another shitty mockbuster, it'll make you tired of them. But if you're like me, on your fourth by this point, God, it makes you want to fall asleep right now. At a certain point, reviewing these films stops being about dissecting technical flaws, those are already evident, and becomes about endurance. This one doesn't implode spectacularly, it doesn't fascinate with its incompetence, it just exists, dully and persistently. The balloon floats, the characters speak, the scenes pass, and when it's over, the overwhelming feeling is total relief. There's bad animation, there's cynical knockoffs, there are low-budget rush jobs, and then there's A Car's Life, Sparky's Big Adventure. A film that feels like it was rendered on a computer actively begging for mercy. It's not just incompetent, it is aggressively, relentlessly incompetent in ways that compound minute after minute until the entire viewing experience curdles into something approaching disbelief. Let's start with the animation, because you cannot escape it, you cannot ignore it, it is there in every single frame, staring back at you with the glossy, dead-eyed sheen of a PlayStation 1 cutscene. Not even a good PS1 cutscene, one of the worst the goddamn PS1 has to offer. That was rejected for being too stiff. The cars don't move, they slide. They rotate like toys being nudged across the fucking desk. There's no suspension, no tire compression, no goddamn sense of weight. When Sparky, our little shit of a protagonist, accelerates, he does so with the physical presence of a JPEG that's been put through about 17 different compressors. And Sparky, let's talk about Sparky. He's not a character, he's a void with headlights. A void that is such an annoying, clueless kid. I know he's meant to go on some sort of character arc, but just over and over again, not a real arc. And then he's suddenly progressed. He has no discernible personality beyond wants to drive and little shit. That's it. That's the emotional complexity, boy. He is the automotive equivalent of a shrug. His arc, if you're generous enough to call it that, consists of being mildly discouraged and mildly encouraged. There's no internal conflict, no flaw to overcome, no meaningful growth. He exists to move from one poorly rendered scene to another while delivering dialogue in a tone that suggests the voice actor recorded everything in a single exhausted afternoon. And then there's Gracie. Oh my god. Gracie. By the time she starts talking, whatever patience you had left is hanging by a thread. And then she opens her mouth and just hacks straight through it. She's written as comic relief, which is already a dangerous game when your phone has the energy of a dead battery you try putting into a gas car. But instead of being funny, she's relentlessly, aggressively irritating. Every line that comes out of her mouth is either painfully obvious or some half-baked attempt at enthusiasm that sounds like it was recorded during a lunch break when the actor had a full plate of food in her mouth. She doesn't contribute to the plot, she doesn't deepen Sparky's lack of character. She doesn't even function as a competent sidekick. She just hovers around, stating the obvious, going, "Oh, well, I'm trying," in the most exacerbated voice possible. She reacts 3 seconds late to everything and clogs up scenes that were already gasping for air. And that voice, that high, grating, synthetic cheerfulness that never matches the emotional temperature of the moment. It's like the film looked at an empty script page and said, "You know what this needs? More Gracie." No, it didn't. It needed less of everything, but especially less of her. Every time she popped back on screen, it felt like the movie was daring you not to lose your mind. This film is a challenge. You should challenge your friends to do this. By the final stretch, you're not rooting for Sparky, you're not invested in his arc, you're just sitting there thinking, please, for the love of everything, stop letting Gracie talk. Get her into a car crash. She's not charming, she's not quirky, she's not endearing. She's a walking, talking reminder that nobody involved stopped to ask whether any of this was actually working. The voice acting across the board is a masterclass in detachment. The lines are delivered with all the enthusiasm of someone reading instruction off a cereal box in a language they don't speak nor understand. There's no chemistry, characters talk at each other, never with each other. Pauses linger awkwardly as if the audio editing was done by someone unfamiliar with the concept of timing. Emotional moments land with the force of a damp sponge. Visually, the environments are insultingly barren. Racetracks float in the void landscapes. Buildings appear with minimal texture detail as though the render engine gave up halfway through applying materials, or the computer it was rendering failed and crashed. The lighting is flat, harsh, and inconsistent. Shadows appear and disappear with no regard for spatial logic. The world does not feel lived in, it barely feels constructed. And the pacing, dear God, the pacing. These scenes stretch without purpose and skid by with zero rhyme or reason at the exact same time. The characters explain things that don't need explaining. The conflicts are introduced and resolved with zero escalation or time dedicated to them. The film trudges forward at a pace that suggests it's actively resisting momentum. It's a driving movie without speed. I hate that I'm not even joking. Then there's a supporting cast, each one more forgettable than the last. The dad, a cardboard cutout with a gravelly voice filter slapped on top. The villain, vaguely smug, vaguely present, never intimidating. The side characters just in and out of scenes like a background asset actually given speaking roles. And we've already talked about Gracie. No one has dimension, no one has stakes. They're all placeholders, masquerading as personalities, as characters, so unconvincingly. The sound design is equally abysmal. The engines don't roar, they hum politely, like they know this film will be sending people to sleep and think they might as well be helping out. Collisions lack any impact, the musical score loops with painful obviousness, often fading in and out without regard for the emotional rhythm. There's moments where silence hangs in the air because the film simply doesn't know how to fill space. By the halfway mark, the frustration starts to simmer, not because the film is offensively ambitious, not because it swings and misses, but because it doesn't swing at all. It coasts, it drifts, it exists in a perpetual state of almost doing something interesting and then immediately retreating. And the dialogue, the endless, clunky, expositionary dialogue, the characters announce their motivations directly. I want to win. You must believe in yourself. Driving is about heart. It's like someone directly compiled every generic sports movie cliche and ran it through a translation filter that stripped away nuance. No metaphor, no subtlety, just blunt declarations delivered in monotone. The driving sequences, which should be the bare minimum requirement for engagement, are catastrophically dull. Cars circle track with minimal camera dynamicism. There's no kinetic energy, no dramatic cutting, no tension. The camera often sits at lifeless angles, watching digital objects glide around with friction. It feels less like a race and more like a screensaver demo. By now, the irritation becomes sharper because you realize it wasn't just low budget, it was low effort. Animation shortcuts pile up, reused movement cycles become obvious, facial expressions remain frozen for entire conversations. There's shots where characters appear to hover slightly above the ground because no one bothered to adjust contact shadows, because no one gave the slightest bit of something resembling a shit about this movie. And Sparky keeps talking, keeps delivering flat, unearned, inspirational lines as the film expects applause for reaching the most basic moral conclusion imaginable. Believe in yourself. Believe in what? You haven't demonstrated competence once this entire runtime. There's a particular kind of anger that comes from wasted time like this. Not from watching something controversial, chaotic, but from watching something this empty. A car's life is empty. Hollow, a shell of an idea stretched thin over a runtime that feels twice as long as it actually is. By the final act, the quote-unquote grand finale, the emotional payoff, the supposed crescendo, there should be excitement, there should be tension. Instead, there's nothing. The animation stays stiff, the stakes stay non-existent. Victory, when it arrives, feels predetermined and entirely unearned. And the ending, the abrupt, anticlimactic ending, no catharsis, no emotional weight, just a quiet fade out as the production collectively decided, that's enough, ship it, I don't care, just get it out. It's difficult to overstate how aggressively mediocre every element is. The character designs lack personality, the environments don't have depth, the script doesn't have structure, the performances don't have energy, the editing doesn't have rhythm, the film doesn't fail in one spectacular way. It fails in every way simultaneously, creating a compounding avalanche of creative apathy. By the time the credits roll, you're not laughing, you're not shocked, you're irritated, because somewhere at some stage of production, multiple checkpoints could have asked, is this good? And the answer, obviously, demonstrably, painfully, and obviously again, would have been no. And yet here it is. Rendered, distributed, existing. A car's life is not charmingly bad, it's not fascinatingly incompetent, it is a void of a craft, feature-length shrug wrapped in a cheap polygons. It's what happens when imitation clouds with indifference. And the worst part? It never even had the decency to crash spectacularly, it just keeps on driving in circles. This is the worst of any of these films, which is quite a bloody feat. Do not do this. Do not ever do what I did. These movies are to test your patience. How much awfulness can you endure before either ending the film, if you make it, or just having to turn it off for your own sanity? For anyone wondering, A Car's Life is the worst one, the second worst is Little Panda Fighter, mainly because it's the longest one, then What's Up for the sheer emptiness of it, then Ratatouille, which manages to not but quite be as awful as the rest of them, and then Tappy Toes, which I almost feel like I've been mean to. Almost.